Richard Rawlings was once a name that echoed through garages and living rooms across America. As the high-octane host of Fast and Loud, he turned his passion for cars into a full-blown television phenomenon. With his signature style, quick wit, and sharp business instincts, Rawlings took viewers on an adrenaline-fueled journey through the world of car restoration, flipping classic rides into dream machines. From junkyards to high-end auctions, his show was more than just entertainment. It was a reflection of his own rise from humble beginnings to automotive royalty. But behind the scenes of fast cars and roaring engines, there was a different story unfolding, one that would ultimately bring Richard Rawlings to his knees in a courtroom, surrounded not by chrome and horsepower, but by lawyers, judges, and stunned silence. The man who had built an empire on grit, charm, and hard work now stood accused of crimes that, if proven true, could unravel everything he had built. As the courtroom drama reached its climax, Rawlings, once defiant and confident, collapsed after hearing the sentence that would change his life forever. To understand how things reached this point, it's essential to look back at the empire Rawlings built. Gas Monkey Garage wasn't just a shop, it was a brand, a cultural icon. What started in a small Dallas garage grew into a global enterprise. Shirts, hats, drinks, restaurants. Rawlings was everywhere. He wasn't just building cars, he was building a lifestyle, and people loved it. Millions tuned in every week to see what wild project he'd take on next. He had the look, the swagger, and the hustle to back it all up. Rawlings was more than a mechanic. He was a businessman with a nose for opportunity. Every deal he made, every car he sold, every camera that captured his signature laugh, it all added to the legend. But as with many fast rises to fame, the spotlight can sometimes hide the shadows. The pressures of maintaining a public image, running a sprawling business, and keeping the money flowing can push even the sharpest minds toward questionable decisions. In court, it wasn't his TV persona that mattered. It wasn't about how many Mustangs he restored or how many engines he rebuilt. It was about facts, figures, contracts, and intent. Allegations began to swirl about financial misconduct, mismanagement of investor funds, and tax irregularities. The man who had once inspired confidence in boardrooms and garages alike now found himself surrounded by legal experts dissecting every business move he had made over the past decade. The prosecution painted a damning picture. According to them, Rawlings had misrepresented financial projections to investors, used company funds for personal gain, and failed to report substantial income streams from sponsorships and merchandise. The defense countered that he was a creative entrepreneur, not an accountant, that any financial discrepancies were the result of poor oversight rather than malicious intent. But in the end, the jury had to decide whether the mistakes were honest errors or deliberate deception. When the sentence was finally read, the room was so quiet you could hear the shuffle of paper. The words fell heavy: a prison term, significant fines, and a mandatory surrender of certain assets. The weight of it hit Rawlings like a freight train. Witnesses described how his knees buckled, how he gripped the edge of the table, how his trademark confidence evaporated in an instant. Medical staff rushed to check his condition as the courtroom sat frozen, unsure whether they were watching justice or tragedy unfold. Outside the courtroom, reactions were mixed. Longtime fans expressed disbelief. Some clung to the hope that this was all a mistake, a misunderstanding that would soon be cleared. Others were angry, feeling betrayed by a man they had admired. In the world of car culture, Rawlings had been a symbol of the American dream, the idea that with enough hustle you could turn a rusty frame into a roaring success. Now, that dream seemed tainted. As the news spread, questions began to mount. What would happen to Gas Monkey Garage? Would the brand survive without its charismatic founder at the helm? Would the show return in any form, or was this truly the end of an era? For employees, partners, and loyal fans, the future was uncertain. Some insiders suggested the business could be restructured, while others predicted a slow fade into memory. Whatever the outcome, one thing was clear: things would never be the same. The collapse of Richard Rawlings in court wasn't just physical, it was symbolic. It marked the crumbling of an image carefully crafted over years, where grit met glamour and mechanical genius met media stardom. When someone builds an identity so tightly wrapped around success and dominance, any fall hits harder, and Rawlings's fall was seismic. It was hard for fans to reconcile the man they saw every week on TV, joking around while restoring a 1968 Dodge Charger, with the figure slumped in a courtroom under the weight of a judge's verdict. But legal troubles don't materialize overnight. The truth is, signs of tension had been simmering beneath the surface for years. Sharp-eyed observers noted that Rawlings' empire expanded fast, maybe too fast. Restaurants, concert venues, clothing lines, sponsorship deals, a tequila brand, and even a music festival were rolled out under the Gas Monkey banner. For a while it seemed like everything he touched turned to gold. But in reality, rapid expansion without solid financial footing often becomes a house of cards. Behind the scenes, insiders hinted at internal conflicts, cash flow issues, and poor management of assets. Some former employees spoke of being pushed to meet impossible deadlines. Others pointed to ambitious deals that drained more money than they brought in. While the front-facing persona remained bold and brash, behind the curtain, the business was bleeding. And Rawlings was doing everything he could to patch the leaks, sometimes with duct tape and a smile, rather than sustainable solutions. When the investigation began, Rawlings tried to maintain composure. Publicly, he downplayed the accusations, calling them exaggerated and misleading. But privately, he was rattled. Legal battles are grueling, especially when they involve federal agencies with unlimited resources. Months of depositions, audits, subpoenas, and media scrutiny began to take their toll. The confident host of Fast and Loud found himself trapped in a slow-moving storm where each legal document was another wave threatening to pull him under. The court proceedings dragged on, bringing forward witnesses from inside the company, financial experts, and former partners. Some testified to Rawlings's brilliance as a marketer and businessman. Others described a man obsessed with image, willing to cut corners and stretch facts to keep the spotlight. Rawlings' lawyers fought hard, but the evidence piled up. Bank records, communications, accounting reports, all of it painted a picture of a man who may have let ambition cloud his judgment. When the prosecution presented its closing argument, it was a stark contrast to the television icon audiences knew. They portrayed him not as a TV host or a passionate car guy, but as a calculated businessman who had exploited his popularity to pull in investors, only to misuse their funds and cook the books. Whether or not this portrayal was entirely accurate, it stuck. The jury believed it. And when the time came to deliver the verdict, it wasn't just guilt they saw. It was the end of an era. The sentence handed down wasn't light. The judge made it clear that financial crimes of this scale couldn't go unpunished, especially when public trust was broken. Along with a substantial prison term, Rawlings was ordered to pay restitution to affected investors, dissolve certain business entities, and forfeit a significant portion of his personal wealth. The court also imposed a ban on holding executive positions in publicly traded companies for a number of years. Outside the courtroom, camera crews and reporters swarmed to capture the aftermath. It was the kind of spectacle Rawlings had once commanded with flair, but now it was out of his control. As the ambulance carried him out for medical evaluation after his collapse, the only sounds were clicking shutters and murmurs of disbelief. Gone were the revving engines and raucous laughter of Gas Monkey Garage. In its place was a quiet uncertainty about what came next. The ripple effects of Rawlings's downfall spread quickly. Gas Monkey Garage's operations were halted temporarily. Sponsors pulled out of existing contracts. Merchandise sales plummeted. The brand, once synonymous with rebel spirit and restoration magic, now bore a stigma. Employees faced layoffs, fans sought answers, and former collaborators scrambled to distance themselves. It was a public relations nightmare, and without Rawlings at the helm, no one seemed to know how to steer the ship. Yet amid the chaos, there were still those who defended him. Friends and close associates painted a more sympathetic picture of a man overwhelmed by the responsibilities of success, of someone who lost control in an effort to maintain what he'd built. They argued that Rawlings was no villain, but a flawed human who made bad choices under immense pressure. For these supporters, the courtroom collapse wasn't a sign of guilt. It was a sign of a man who had finally cracked after carrying too much for too long. Rawlings's legal team issued a statement soon after, emphasizing their intention to appeal the sentence. They claimed the court had failed to take into account key evidence and witness testimony. Whether or not the appeal would succeed, it was clear that the road ahead would be long and difficult. Appeals can take months or even years, and during that time, Rawlings would have to navigate a completely different life from the one he once knew. Back at Gas Monkey Garage, a skeleton crew remained to maintain the shop. Some die-hard fans still made pilgrimages to the location, snapping photos in front of the now quiet garage doors. The social media accounts associated with the brand grew silent. Rumors swirled about potential buyers looking to acquire the intellectual property, but nothing materialized. It was as though the whole enterprise had hit pause, waiting to see whether its creator would return or be erased from its legacy entirely. There's something particularly tragic about the fall of someone who seemed to embody energy, drive, and relentless optimism. Richard Rawlings wasn't just a host. He was a symbol of going big or going home. He took risks, chased deals, and told anyone who would listen that he was building something that would outlast him. But in the end, the very ambition that propelled him forward may have been the same force that led to his collapse. In the aftermath of Richard Rawlings's courtroom collapse, the conversation shifted from scandal to reflection. The man who once stood atop a multi-million-dollar empire built from steel, grease, and roaring engines had now become a symbol of ambition unchecked. He had reached heights few in the custom car world ever dreamed of, and then fell with a force that shook the very foundation of his legacy. What remained in the wake of the legal fallout and public shock was a silence that felt almost eerie. Gas Monkey Garage, once buzzing with activity, now echoed with the absence of its founder's presence. The air of invincibility that surrounded Rawlings for years had vanished. He had become a cautionary tale for entrepreneurs, creators, and influencers everywhere, a reminder that success without structure, fame without accountability, and growth without limits can come at a devastating cost. Yet even in silence, Richard Rawlings remained a topic of constant discussion. Some were quick to write him off completely. They called him a fraud, a manipulator, someone who used charisma and confidence to hide deeper flaws. But others pushed back, arguing that he was a visionary who lost control, a man who believed too much in his own myth. To them, Rawlings wasn't evil, just human, fallible, vulnerable, prone to mistakes under pressure like anyone else. What complicated matters even more was that for every misstep, there had been genuine moments of inspiration. Rawlings brought attention to a niche community. He encouraged countless viewers to pick up a wrench, restore a forgotten vehicle, or start their own shop. He played a major role in giving automotive culture a modern identity, gritty, rebellious, and unapologetically loud. That influence couldn't be undone, no matter how far he fell. Inside prison walls, life moved differently for Rawlings. Reports suggested that he kept a low profile, rarely interacting with others, and spending most of his time reading, reflecting, and writing. Some said he was working on a memoir, a raw account of his life, his rise, and his fall. Whether that project would ever see the light of day was unknown, but many believed it could offer insight into a world few truly understood: the high-speed collision between entertainment, entrepreneurship, and ego. Outside, the world moved on. New shows emerged, new personalities filled the gap, and the custom car scene continued without him. But Rawlings's absence was still felt, especially by those who had grown up watching him build an empire one chassis at a time. His voice, his energy, his flair, they were hard to replace. Even his critics admitted that, love him or hate him, Rawlings had brought something unique to the table. He made people care. He made people watch. Still, the road ahead for him was filled with uncertainty. Upon eventual release, he would face restrictions, public scrutiny, and a damaged brand. The question wasn't whether he could return to TV or business, it was whether the world would let him. Would fans forgive? Would investors trust him again? Could he rebuild not just a company, but a reputation? Time has a strange way of reshaping public perception. People who fall from grace often resurface years later with revised narratives. They re-enter public life with humility, self-awareness, and a deeper understanding of their flaws. For Rawlings, that possibility still lingered. He could reemerge, not as the cocky host of Fast and Loud, but as a humbled man with hard-won wisdom. But that version of his story would depend entirely on the choices he made from here on out. What's undeniable is that the collapse in court wasn't just a physical reaction to a prison sentence. It was an emotional breaking point, the moment all the pressure, guilt, and loss came crashing down. The look on his face, the sound of his body hitting the floor, the stunned silence that followed, it was a moment that will be remembered by everyone in that room. It wasn't just the end of a trial, it was the end of an era. And yet, from endings, new beginnings often emerge. Whether Richard Rawlings ever rebuilds his life or fades quietly into obscurity, his story will continue to be told. In barbershops and garages, in business schools and documentaries, his name will live on as both an icon and a lesson. A reminder that success can be thrilling but also dangerous, that fame can lift you and bury you, that even the fastest cars can crash. What remains now is reflection, not just for Rawlings, but for all who watched, supported, or idolized him. His fall isn't just about one man. It's about how easily ambition can go unchecked, how fame can distort judgment, and how pressure can erode even the strongest foundations. But it's also about the human capacity for growth, even in darkness. So as the doors of the courtroom closed and the media frenzy faded, the story of Richard Rawlings didn't end. It simply shifted lanes, from the fast and loud to the quiet and uncertain, from center stage to the back roads of reflection. Only time will tell whether this detour leads to redemption or remains a final sobering stop.